Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a premier field engineer dedicated to supporting system center technologies. For this session, we'll be talking about Configuration Manager 2012, specifically application deployment. This is part 3 in a series of discussions that we're holding to cover the topic of application deployment in Configuration Manager 2012. As we get started, some conditions of use and other information, and our agenda. So basically we're going to talk in general about application deployment and quickly applications versus packages, then jump right into the rest of the session, which is demos, building applications. In fact, on this screen, I've already done the introduction. This is part 3 of our series. This is focused on applications. In the topic applications or packages, in session 2, we covered the idea of, or the capability for configuring packages, the more legacy style of deployments that are available in previous versions of Configuration Manager and are brought forward for backwards compatibility and some other corner scenarios in Configuration Manager 2012. Applications are certainly the new mechanism for deploying content to the environment. Sometimes you'll find that you may still want to pick packages. There are some scenarios where you will want to pick packages versus applications. A specific example of that would be if you're trying to run a command line, something that may already exist on the target machine, something that you're not truly distributing, if you will, to the target machine. Package probably is a good option for that, and there are others. Applications, though, the new mechanism for deploying content, really has some pretty cool advantages over what we had in packages. And as we kind of go through the options today, I think you'll see the advantages that are there. So with that said, let's go build some applications and distribute them to our test environment. So the rest of our time today will be spent in demo. Just like we built out some test packages, if you will, in the previous session, we're going to build out 3 test applications and show how they kind of, in this scenario, will link together in different options that you can do with those applications. Always bear in mind that where we're headed is to cover this topic end to end. This is part 3 of what will be many individual sessions that will cover the topic of application deployment. So far, we've done the introduction. We've done some stuff on the server side to set up packages and applications. In the next session, we're going to turn our look to the client side to see how the work we do on the server actually reflects itself on the client, and then from there, we'll just keep digging deeper and bring in other technologies and so on. So this is part 3. So in application management, we have the options available to us. Certainly we have the packages we talked about last time, and we have the applications node. So as we start out here, not too exciting, really just a couple of different options to either create a new application or import an application. We have nothing here right now. Once we add our first application, then we'll have information. So let's just go ahead and start by creating our application. This is going to launch a wizard. Okay. On this wizard, I have the choice of either automatically detecting information about my application, and I can do that if I have a Windows installer file or an AppV file or a mobile cabinet file and that sort of thing. Really, this is a shortcut mechanism. Wizards really cool because they can help you shortcut some of the detail, get the pieces you want built quickly. Certainly that's the case whenever we have something like an MSI, have something like a mobile cabinet file, and you'll see those items get built as we go along. But if you don't have those, there's an option to manually specify how the application should be built. Okay. Now, we'll use one or the other in a couple of different scenarios as we go along. One thing to understand too, if you choose one of these options, then the number of pages you're going to see in this wizard is far reduced than what you see here. The other thing to understand is in this wizard, we're creating the application, but this wizard also creates what's known as a deployment type, which goes along with the application. So let's put a few definitions in place. In historical versions, or previous versions, if you will, of Configuration Manager, Config Manager 2007, SMS 2003, SMS 2.0 for that matter, all of our content deployment really was thought of in terms of packages. Packages had two components, or a couple of different components that were necessary to get the deployment done. One was called a program, the other is called an advertisement. The parallel in application model is that the package is the application, the program is the deployment type, and the advertisement is the deployment itself. Okay, so we'll see those shape up here in just a sec as we go along. Okay, so and another thing to mention here before we roll on, this kind of option, being able to choose an MSI, being able to choose at the version of the application or cabinet file, has a couple of discussion points. First, most things, a lot of things anyway, that you deploy today will be in one of those forms. Likely the most common thing you'll deploy will be an MSI. Since that's the case, having the shortcut here to be able to pick an MSI, be able to fill out that information automatically for you, that kind of thing is beneficial. You'll see that as we go along. The other thing this first place gives us a chance to talk about is the new user-centric approach that we have to application deployment. Historically, Configuration Manager has not been all that good at factoring in the users in an environment. The strong suit of Configuration Manager has always been to deploy to systems, and that's what the vast majority of customers have done with Configuration Manager, is deploy to systems. Doesn't mean that we haven't historically been able to deploy to users and user groups, just not in a robust way like you will see that we can do in Config Manager 2012. This kind of gives a hint in that direction. So in Configuration Manager 2012, if we're deploying to the user, the goal is to give that user a consistent computing experience regardless of how they are interacting with the environment. Case in point, if a user is actually logged on to the system that they use every day, all day, it's the main system they use, or in Configuration Manager 2012 terminology, their primary device, and you'll hear that terminology more as we go along, then we may want to treat that deployment differently than in other scenarios, meaning we may want to give them a locally installed version of an application, okay, thus the MSI. But if they're using another workstation somewhere else, that may be a shared workstation or a loaner workstation or whatever the case may be, then we still want to give that user a consistent computing experience, but instead of taking the time to drop the applications on the system, to actually physically install the applications and so on, we may want to give them a virtualized version of that application. And to the user, the experience should really be no different than if they have all the apps installed locally. But to the administrator, it makes things more fluid, makes things quicker, reduces the need to uninstall the application and manage it that way when you're done, that kind of thing. And the same kind of deal if there is a mobile version of the given application that we can install on the device, then we can do that. Now, a couple of points about that. Mobile device deployment, the cabinet file, the Nokia SIS file, those assume depth management. This isn't a mobile discussion right here, a mobile device discussion, but again, there is a difference in light management, depth management in Configuration Manager 2012. These options for cabinet files and so on are installing applications on the device, which by definition means depth management. Depth management, again, just as a quick mention, includes things like Windows Mobile 6.1, 6.5, Nokia Symbian, not the other devices that are out there, even including Windows Phone 7, 7.5, Android, iPhone. Those are light managed, so those don't apply whenever we talk about deploying a mobile cabinet file. Okay, so that said, let's roll on through here. Now, the scenario we're going to create is this. And it's just a silly scenario that I dreamed up, but it kind of tries to tie some things together and illustrates the point. One of the things you're going to quickly see in application deployment is that you have the ability to build relationships between various applications to satisfy various needs. Okay? The scenario we're going to build here is the idea that we're going to deploy an application called Robocopy. Okay? Robocopy is going to go out to the environment, and as a precursor for Robocopy, we're going to need to have .NET Framework 2.0. Okay? So we'll factor that in as we go along. Then later we're going to realize that instead of robocopy, we actually want rich copy. For whatever reason, we've decided rich copy is the better version, so we'll build rich copy into an application and link it into the structure, again, just to demonstrate how all this stuff can be done. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is build an application for robocopy. Robocopy is actually an executable. I don't have the option for an executable in this list, so instead, I'm going to manually specify the application information. Good place to start, give us a few extra views into the wizard, and so on. So I'm just going to call this robocopy demo. Okay? And here I have the opportunity to specify manufacturer, software version, optional references, all the kinds of stuff you would expect on kind of a general tab. Also, you have administrative categories. You don't have to fill anything out here, but don't sell this short, because if, as you deploy applications to the environment, particularly if the user is going to interact and have the option to manually install those applications, okay, then having a good way to categorize these things so the user knows what buckets mean what and where different kind of applications might be is useful. Also, the next page you'll see is the application catalog. So in Configuration Manager 2012, you have a couple of different options. One is to deploy the application like you always have and target it to the system. There you have options for installing optional versus mandatory, or in Configuration Manager 2012, the new terms are available versus required. Okay, and in those kind of scenarios, then the software, if you allow it to be optional and you allow the user to install it manually, that will show up in the new version of Run Advertised Programs known as Software Center. Okay, I'll show you that later on. Then you have, on the next page of this wizard, the ability to put things into the software catalog. This is a place that users can go in their context, but go to a web page and see what programs are available to them, deployed to them as the user. In the same way, having categories that the user can logically look at to determine what might be of interest to them is helpful, rather than sprawling out perhaps hundreds of applications to sort through, bucketing them so it's more organized, better, easier to look at, so on, helpful. Okay, so date published, when this thing actually showed up. Whether or not you want to allow the application to be installed from an install application task sequence step is very similar to what we've had in previous versions. So if you're deploying task sequences, you may want to set up applications that can be deployed from that task sequence, either as part of OS deployment, or there still is a need to have, in certain scenarios, task sequences that drive the deployment process. Again, I'll mention that more as we go along. Okay, so all of those options here. Other things, so owners, the ability to specify who the owner of an application is, who the support context for the application should be. Okay, so I'll leave these as default and roll forward. So on the next screen, I have my application catalog. Same kind of information. What version or what languages that this is deployed in. What your localized application name should be. Various user categories if you want to supply those. And I would encourage you to, again, explore the categories and build out your own buckets. Any user documentation that you want to provide with the application. Localized description. And then any keywords to help the user search. We have some icon choices, a bunch of them that you can browse through and really have a good number of icons that can represent your deployment. All right. So now, a quick mention here, just because we define information for the application catalog, again, does not mean it's going to appear in the application catalog automatically. I already mentioned it kind of, but I'll mention it explicitly here. The way that you make an application show up in the user application catalog is by targeting the application to a collection of users or user groups. That's the tie-in that puts it in the catalog. Just simply specifying the information here by itself does not. Okay? So let's move along. So I've got enough information here for the application. Now let's go to our deployment type. Again, we're shifting over here, and certainly there's a lot more to defining the application. You'll see that in a minute. But that's all we need to define the application right now. Now we're going to define the deployment type. Again, what's the break here? in old style terminology, the application is the package. The deployment type is the program. Well, on the next screen, you're going to find out, in fact, I'll just show it to you now, that for the deployment type, well, okay, sorry, you're not going to see it yet. I'm going to have to add one. Okay, so let me pause here. So as we go into the deployment type, one thing you're going to notice is one of the first questions you're going to get asked is, where is the content that I'm deploying? Okay? In other words, where's the source directory? Well, in historical or in previous versions of Configuration Manager, that question is asked as a part of the package, okay, not as a part of the program. Again, to pull some terms together. In 2012, it's asked as part of the deployment type. Why is that? Well, the answer really boils down to the fact that you could have different source directories, and will, frankly, depending on the type of deployment you're actually doing. Okay? And here's where we see the ability to deploy an executable that did not show up on the actual wizard for starting off creating the application. So here's the Windows installer, here's the @v, mobile client, and so on. This is our script installer. So if you have things like an executable you want to deploy, that's what you're going to do. Okay, now notice whenever I click executable or script installer, automatically it defaults me to manually because I have to specify the information here manually. Okay, so I'm going to click next. Now I'm going to give it a name, DT for deployment type. Leave the rest of it alone for my example here. Now where's the content? So the source directory for the content. Again, here's a little bit of a cosmetic difference, but one that's worth talking about for a minute. So content location. Where is the content I'm wanting to deploy? In legacy package deployment, classic package deployment, you would get a choice here. Either supplying, historically anyway, you would get a choice here. Either supplying the path as a UNC or giving it as the local drive on the site server. That option doesn't exist anymore. In fact, you see here, you're going to have to give a UNC. Reason for that really is just to help you in terms of server replacement, migration, that kind of thing. If you were to have an option to choose the local drive on the site server as you did historically, then that would work fine, provided that the site server always existed and had the local copy. But if you ever migrated to another site server and did not carry along the source directories the way you should in the same paths and all that kind of thing, then you would break your ability to find your source files and that kind of thing. Therefore, it always really has been the best idea to use UNC. Now we enforce using the UNC. So let me go get my source files. Okay, so we're doing robocopy. I think I'm make sure. Oops. There we go. All right, so that's sufficient for my path. Now I have the choice to persist the content in the client cache. Just a reminder what this is. So if you're deploying an application, same thing applies to a package. If you're deploying an application that you expect to run on a recurring schedule and you need that content to remain in the cache, meaning you don't want to be in a scenario where you may have a client that's maybe in download churn, if you will. Maybe the cache gets filled up and this application gets pushed out before the next runtime, so it has to download it again, that kind of thing. Selecting to persist the content in the cache basically locks it into the cache on the client so that it's always there. Okay, not there by default doesn't make sense to do for every kind of deployment you might create, or every application or package you might create, but it is there as an option. So what is here by default? Allow clients to share content with other clients on the same subnet. So another term for this, branch cache. Branch cache was introduced as available in Configuration Manager 2007. Really, not true. Branch cache was introduced in Windows 7 as an OS, Windows Vista, with the right version of files on it and so on. We supported it first in Configuration Manager 2007. Here, we support it by default. So if you have branch cache configured on your network, which I would encourage you to take a look at that if you don't, and you have the appropriate workstation versions to support it, Windows Vista will do it. Again, the right versions in Windows 7 Enterprise. Forward will do it. Then it's a good thing to do because now you're your systems, your branch cache enabled workstation systems on a given subnet. Once one of them has content, then the others can get the content from that one workstation, or as the deployment goes on, more workstations on that subnet, and really eases the deployment hit on having to download across the WAN link, having to hit, have multiple workstations hit the same distribution point, all that kind of thing. Just makes a whole lot of sense to turn on, and really cool technology. So now I have to specify a command used to install the application. Well, this is a good check to figure out whether you've specified your content location correctly. If you hit browse, then it's going to take you into the folder you specified. Notice that the default file type I'm looking for is an exe here. So if I would have chosen MSI, it would be an MSI. If I would have chosen a cabinet file, it would be a cab file. But here's an exe, and that's what I have. So I'm going to specify my executable. Doesn't notice that anything has been verified, so it's warning me here. I'm going to say yes. So basically, I have a choice now. I can specify other command line options if I want to use them, whatever, but I'm going to have robocopy.exe now as my deployment that I'm going to do. Now, the next thing I have to do, or have an option to do anyway, is create an uninstall program. So not only do we natively support installation of the application, but we natively include the ability to specify an uninstall command. In the case of something like an MSI, as you will see, that's really easy to do. The MSI itself has a product code associated with it, and we'll plug that in as part of the wizard. Again, you'll see that in a minute, and that will be supplied for you. It is a really, really good idea to include an uninstall program for an application. Okay? In some cases, such as this, the executable itself, we really don't detect what the uninstall mechanism should be. Maybe the executable has the uninstall as a switch available to it. If so, easy enough, just browse to the executable, add the switch, and you're done. If you need to run a script of some sort to uninstall, that's an option too. Whatever way you want to do the uninstall, it's a really good idea to have this in place, and I'll show you why in a bit in future pages, and whether or not to run the install or uninstall as 32-bit, 64-bit clients, and so on. Okay, so I'm going to specify just a bogus uninstall here to be able to satisfy some things here in a bit. So okay, so that I'm just going to use a batch file there. All right, batch file doesn't exist, whatever, but that's what I'm going to type in. Okay. Now I have to specify a detection method. This is something I cannot go around. Okay. Again, if I have an MSI, we'll do this part to some degree for you. If you want to add to it, you can. But in the case of an executable, I don't know, or the system doesn't know how to automatically detect what the detection method should be. So you have to stop here and supply it. Okay. So this is really cool from a couple of perspectives. The one I'll mention here is that using the detection method allows us, as we deploy the application, to look on our target system and find out, is the application already there? If it's already there, then why deploy it again, right? So we'll just go ahead and pass on by and not worry about it because it's already present. Okay. There's other things too. Regardless, you have to specify something here. So in the case of this executable, I'm going to click Add. I have a couple of options here: File System, Registry, Windows Installer. Okay, if it's a Windows Installer file. So I'll just choose something to let me go past the wizard. Okay, so I'll just put in X:, and then X, whatever. Let me pass through. That's fine. Obviously, that doesn't work, but whatever. I can also, if nothing up here will satisfy the need that I have to detect the program or the deployment, then I can use a custom script and write a quick script. We'll run that script and return back results and be able to tell if the application is there or not. Okay, and this generally this up here is pretty sufficient. Being able to look in the file system or being able to look in the registry, maybe add, remove programs, that kind of thing. Pretty sufficient normally to be able to find those, but script is there as a failsafe. Okay, so finally, user experience. So on the user experience page, we have some familiar options. May not seem familiar at first for users coming from previous versions of Configuration Manager, but they are. So we'll start with installation behavior. So here we have three options: install for user, install for system, or install for system if resources device, or otherwise install for user. So these really are familiar. So in previous versions of Configuration Manager, in fact, on the packages still, these options are known as the credentials under which the deployment installs. So if you want to install using the user's credentials, then install for user. If you want to install using administrative credentials, then install for system. That'll use the local system account. Or if you want the targeting to be able to decide how you install, then you choose the third option. So if you target a collection that contains a device, then we'll go ahead and install for system. Otherwise, if we have a collection with users, we'll install for users. So that's what those options are. Options here are the ones that we've come to know from previous versions. Only install when a user is logged on, whether or not a user is logged on, only when no users are logged on. That makes sense for a system. For a user, there's really only one that makes sense, and that's install when a user is logged on. Right? If we're going to install for the user has to be there. Okay, and then we have the choice install for system if resources a device, otherwise install for user. Okay. All right. So we'll go ahead and put system. Doesn't really matter. I'm not going to execute this right now. Allow users to view and interact with the program installation. Typically, if you're installing for a system specifically, the user won't see it because it's in the context of the system. Talked about in session 2 that this is useful, specifically for troubleshooting, specifically if you want users to be able to interact. Typically, you're not going to want users to interact whenever you make a deployment to a system. You want to do that silently, typically. But if you're in a troubleshooting scenario, you want to set up interactions so you can see what's going on behind the scenes. It's a great option to pass that through, do the troubleshooting. If you want to do it in active deployment, you can. But typically, I don't see that. A maximum allowed runtime in minutes. So this is really important if you're using maintenance windows in your environment. Haven't talked about maintenance windows yet, but it's the same as it was in Configuration Manager 2007. Basically, you can define windows of time where deployments can act in the environment. So default here is 120 minutes, 2 hours. Most applications don't take 2 hours to install. So setting this number, both this number for maximum allowed runtime and then estimated runtime, are important, again, if you're using maintenance windows. Probably a good idea just to set them anyway to a realistic value. So if you do decide to use maintenance windows in the future, maybe you're not using them now, but in the future you decide to use them, you don't have to go back and make modifications to your deployments. Here's the point. If you have a maintenance window that's set for 2 hours, and you leave this to the default of 2 hours, it is very possible that this thing will never run. Okay? Because when we go to deploy, to run a deployment, to run on the system, then what we're going to do is check our maintenance window, see how much time we have left, calculate it against what we think the maximum allowed runtime should be, and if we don't have enough time, we're not going to run. So setting this to a realistic value, really important. Okay. Next. All right, so now any requirements, I'm going to pass this for now, and we're going to talk about it later, any dependencies and so on. Again, pass that for now, and we're going to go ahead and close. Okay. So we're going to roll on through the wizard, and next and next. So not too hard of a wizard to go through, pretty easy as far as number of things to configure. Again, this was a lot more pages than you would normally have in this wizard because we have deployed manually. We've had to supply information manually. All right, so waiting for the wizard to finish up, and then we'll go through and look at what actually was created. Okay, so the application is created and we'll close. So here it is. Robocopy is created. And we can go explore now what our Robocopy demo looks like. So here we are. We have the application. We also notice the tabs at the bottom, deployment types and deployments. So we have one deployment type created. You can, if you want to look at the deployment type, come right here, go to properties, no problem. Or you can look at it all kind of in a unified way with looking at the application. Now notice also that my context-sensitive ribbon has changed now. We have a few Options. Now that I'm looking at deployment type, I have the deployment type tab. If I go back and look at the home menu, then I'll see options that are globally available. All of the different choices I may want are on the right-click menu, again, depending on context and so on, but you can choose whichever is more comfortable for you. All right, so let's look at the properties of our deployment or our application. So you're going to see a lot of tabs here that you didn't see as a part of the wizard. So starting off, here's the general tab. We've already talked about this, so nothing new to talk about here, just a little bit more information. Revision number, what the status is, whether it's superseded. Okay, and notice the supersedence tab, which will tie all this together in a minute. When it was modified, created, whatever. Application catalog information, again, much the same exactly as it was we just talked about. So here's a references section. So I mentioned that applications can be tied together. Okay, the way they can be tied together is in terms of dependencies or supercedence, and we'll see that next as we create another couple of applications. So we'll come back to this in a minute whenever we actually have those other things. Right now, there are no other applications, and therefore are no dependencies. But if you did have dependencies, you would have them shown here. So applications that depend on this application. If some other application is created that actually depends on this one being there, then you'll see that in the list. Again, it's a good way to bubble up to you what the impact will be of deleting this application. Okay, one mention: as long as you do have those relationships between applications, you can't delete an application where there are relationships tied to it. Okay, so there is protection there. You'll see that, but at least this is a way to bubble it up. Other things, you can see applications that supersede this application here. All right. Distribution status, how we're going to handle the distribution. So distribution priority, 1. Medium is typically fine to keep set. Whether you want to distribute the content for this package to your preferred distribution points automatically, okay, meaning when a client requests the content for the package, if it's not available on a preferred distribution point, then we can actually go ahead and flag that based on that client request, the content's deployed. If you'll remember, in Configuration Manager 2007, we had the peer DP, or the branch distribution point, that was available. This option existed on your branch distribution point. Distribute on demand is what it was called there. So if a client came up, asked for the content, it wasn't on your branch distribution point, then we had processes in the back that would go automatically provision it to the distribution point and make it available. Certainly there would be a little bit of delay. The initial request would not work from the client because the content wasn't there, but the next time, hopefully the client went to ask for it, it would be there, so it would work. Same kind of idea here for sure. Whether or not or how you want to handle your pre-staged distribution point content, if you're using that in your environment. Okay, I'll talk about this more a little bit when we get to the ribbon. Deployment types. This is the one we just created. Again, more on that in a minute. Content location. So if we have distribution points or distribution point groups that have the content deployed, then or available, then we'll list them here. Notice again, all we've done so far is create the application, create the deployment type. We don't have a deployment, so we can't actually distribute this to any systems yet or users. And we also have not put this on a distribution point. So again, even if we did have a deployment, we couldn't do anything with it. We can certainly deploy it, but the clients or users couldn't run it because it's not on any distribution point. So we'll add that as we go along. We've already talked about distribution points a lot in the introduction piece of this series, and we'll mention them again as we go along. Supercedence. So this is where I create my supercedence relationships. Again, I'll show you that in just a sec. And then our ever-present security tab. So let's go back to our deployment types for a minute. So again, I could launch properties down here just like I am going to edit up here. Okay, I can add new deployment types. So again, let's talk about this for a minute. So the application that I'm going to deploy could have different forms of desired deployment that I will need to account for as we go forward. Okay, so it could be that I want to create a version of the application that will be deployed to users when they are on their main computing device. In other words, their primary device. In that case, I may choose to be using an MSI-based install, or as I created here, an executable that will deploy it locally onto the target device. Or it could be that the user is on a device that's not their primary system, and we want to give them the application virtualization. That kind of thing. Could be that I want to have a deployment that is available for users in some cases, but is mandatory and or required for systems in other cases, right? So I can accommodate both of those. It all depends. The application is the application, but the way I deploy it is defined in the deployment type. Okay, so you very likely will have multiple deployment types for a given application in your environment. So for now, I just have one, and that's all I really need. So let's go ahead and cancel this piece and go look at the properties or edit our deployment type. So again, the general information, we saw this already, not a whole lot to add here. Content, where the content is located, the source directory, if you will. Whether or not you want to allow fallback. So if you want to allow this deployment type to be executed when there is no local distribution point within the client's boundaries, then we can allow this to be served from a fallback distribution point. Again, falling back, the ability to fall back requires both the application, or in this case deployment type, be configured to allow that, and the distribution point, at least one, be configured to support fallback. Distribution points often are configured to allow fallback, or as I recall, they are by default configured to allow fallback, but the applications by default are not. So both have to support it in order for it to work. Deployment options. So if we are in a boundary that we are configured to be slow, then the default option is to not download any content, just to wait until we're back within a boundary that's considered to be fast. You can choose to bypass that if you want to and set to download regardless. Some cases you might, with many cases WAN links today are all fast anyway, so may or may not be an issue for you in your environment, but at least you're aware here of what it is. Programs. So this is where we have our native install, uninstall support, and this wasn't in the wizard, our product code. So this is kind of cool. Historically, whenever MSIs first became available, and this really is MSI specific, when MSIs first became available, there were some issues with deploying these things in the environment. Not issues really in Configuration Manager, but issues because of the way the new MSI technologies were enabled, and sometimes folks didn't really understand the implications of taking certain actions. Let me explain by an example. So if, for example, you were deploying Office, just to pick a common product, by MSI, then that deployment would go along, again, regardless of how the deployment mechanism was kicked in. It doesn't have to be Configuration Manager, but you could do it through GPO, whatever. So you would deploy Office. Office was MSI based. So as you deploy Office, you may or may not include all of the different features that you need, whatever, but the installation would proceed. Now the workstation systems or the target systems have this application. So once the deployment was done, sometimes administrators would remove the source directory, if you will, for the MSI. Well, when an MSI installs, one of the things it will do is plug into the registry where the source files came from. So in the event that it needs to go back and add new features or repair itself, okay, it knows where to go for the source files. Well, there other scenarios, if there are certain hotfixes that are applied, then the MSI will check for its source directory. All right. Well, if that source directory is gone, those kind of actions would fail. Particularly the hotfix deployments is where we saw some things. So to help protect the source directory, then this option was added to Configuration Manager to read the MSI information in, and as long as it's on in Configuration Manager and on distribution point, then we can get to it, or the workstations that have the MSI have a location they can get to the source directory. Will recode the location of the MSI source to be our distribution point, and we can always go get it for repair, that kind of thing. Okay, that's what it's there for. Some folks use it, some folks don't. Whether you want to use it's completely optional. Detection method, we've already talked about what this is for. Okay, in brief anyway. We'll add a couple of things as we go along. User experience, whether to install for system user. Again, we've talked about this a bit. All right, so this one we didn't see in the wizard, and this is kind of a cool option. So this option historically has been seen as after running, what action should we take? Okay, what action should Configuration Manager take? So the three options below the one that's highlighted are the ones that were present in previous versions of Configuration Manager. Basically, either don't take any specific action, just roll with the punches, or after the software is installed, there may be a forced client restart, system restart. The Config Manager client will force a restart, that kind of thing. So we've added a fourth one here. Determine the behavior that's intended based on the exit code, okay, or return code. So let's just jump ahead to the return code section. So the return code, by default, are one of these five. Okay, typically 0 or 3010 would be the return codes that you might expect from an application. Either success, no reboot, 1707 might also mean success, no reboot. 3010, reboot required. 1641, hard reboot. Fast retry, 1616, those kind of things. All of those are fairly standard exit codes. Most applications you're going to deploy today will adhere to standard exit codes, meaning once we're finished, we'll return an exit code. Configuration Manager would know how to interpret it. They're here by default, and everything's happy. Okay, that's not true of all applications. In some cases, the application developer might choose a different exit code for any number of reasons. Maybe they want to give more detail about the way their deployment progressed and so on. Bottom line is, if Configuration Manager doesn't know what an exit code is and how to interpret it, then sometimes those deployments, even though they're successful, might be interpreted as a failure, which is just a frustrating thing, right? So the ability to specify a return code and how to interpret that was first added in Configuration Manager 2007, RC or R2, I believe, into task sequencing. So there's a step in there, run command line, that allows you to specify the return code. Now that's brought forward. So if you do have those non-standard applications that use a non-standard return code, maybe a return code of 1, meaning success but user action required, those kinds of things. Now you know how to interpret them on an application by application basis, or in this case, deployment type by deployment type basis. You can configure the appropriate return codes that how we should interpret them based on the deployment. So pretty cool stuff. Again, requires you to test the application, know what the return codes are, but now you can configure those. Okay? Dependencies, we'll see in just a minute, allow you to link in your different applications and define what applications are dependent where and how applications depend on one another. Okay? So let's return back to the Requirements tab. So in historical versions of Configuration Manager, before I say that, let me start here. The Requirements tab basically allows you to configure rules for the deployment, things that you want to check, things that must be in place before the deployment's allowed to go forward. Historically, that kind of logic was introduced into collections in historical versions of Configuration Manager. Collections were built that would have a bunch of different criteria potentially on them to make sure there's enough hard drive space. There's certain processor types. There's maybe certain registry entries or certain files or all of those kinds of things. Certainly reasonable to do that on collections. If you want to do that still, you can. But the beauty of these requirements is that hopefully we can reduce the number of collections that are built for those kinds of grouping purposes, and instead offload that processing into the application onto the individual clients that are receiving the deployment, and make things a little bit more efficient. Again, you don't have to do it that way. I would encourage you to do it that way where it makes sense. using this kind of technology as an example really hopefully will clean up the collection sprawl that's seen in many different cases. Okay, this is good enough technology, the rules checking and so on, that if you wanted to, again, I'm not recommending this, okay, but if you wanted to, you could actually deploy an application to the all systems collection. That is really a bad idea, typically, because every single system in the all systems collection would then receive that application and process it. Okay. Well, in 2012, with appropriately configured rules, you could actually do that. Again, not recommended, but just to illustrate the power of rules and requirements. You could actually do that, and with appropriately configured requirements, protect against deploying things to the wrong systems, even though you're targeting the all systems collection. Okay, so hopefully this mechanism will refactor the way you look at what collections need to be built and how we should offload, and hopefully a hybrid approach will come out of this. Some collections certainly will need to be built, but a lot of the logic, hopefully, for how the deployment continues will hopefully be in the rules. Okay. Another thing real quick. So MSIs specifically, or deployments, I guess specifically, in a lot of cases come about by repackaging content into another form. Maybe I've seen it go several ways. Maybe MSIs are repackaged into executables, or MSIs are repackaged into other MSIs, or executables are repackaged into MSIs. The whole process of repackaging is really driven, in my experience, by the fact that people want to put rules and logic and structure around their deployments. Good reasons for doing that kind of thing. In most cases, repackaging, even with Configuration Manager 2007, really could be avoided, and we could do everything natively. Certainly in Configuration Manager 2012, the arguments for repackaging are far reduced. In fact, I would argue that really there is no reason to repackage anymore. In fact, if you do repackage content in Configuration Manager 2012 and deploy it through the application deployment mechanism, at least it raises a flag in my mind to wonder whether some of the benefit of the application deployment engine, as we've already talked about, detecting the installation, some of the rules that we can put in here, some of that might be circumvented. You may very likely won't get all of the benefit out of the application deployment mechanism that you would otherwise. So especially with the requirements engine, the rules that are available, we can drive business logic into your application deployments, as you'll see shortly. So with the power of application deployment, really would encourage you, if you are repackaging, to take another look at that and figure out if you still really need to do that. If you don't, then we should move away from it and let it be done through the native engine. Okay, so let me add for a minute. So options here are either custom, or if you're deploying to a device, okay, then you can use some of our default options of checking disk space, checking CPU, OU, that kind of thing. If you're deploying to a user, then we only have one option here by default, and that's to detect whether the user is running on their primary device. This is the logic that would be used for deployment type that would be geared either to the user's primary device or to, in that scenario where the user is actually logged on to the system they use all the time, versus, in that case might want an MSI, versus when the user is logged on to a shared system, maybe not their primary device, and instead we want to deploy an AppV version. So again, with this logic, if you're creating the MSI deployment type, then you would look at the user, look at the primary device, say, hey, yes, true, the primary device equals true, and so therefore we satisfy that condition, and maybe we're going to deploy the MSI version. Or you can have another deployment type where you have this rule says primary device equals false, and in that case we're going to deliver a virtualized app. Okay, so flexibility there. Again, if you don't have something covered that you want to build in, then you can use a custom rule. And certainly I've got one here that we'll use in just a minute that I've already built. But you can create your own custom. So if you click Create and look at the drop-down of available mechanisms for creating custom rules, this hopefully will spur your mind to think, oh, that looks very similar to compliance settings, or DCM as it was called in Configuration Manager 2007. And if that's what you think, then you're absolutely correct, because this is exactly the list that you would see in compliance settings. All right. So as you build rules, then you can store them off and they will be reusable. I've already got one here. Okay. So those custom rules will go into global conditions. In fact, all of the conditions that are in here will go into global conditions. All right. So I'll show you this requirements here in just a minute. All right. So that's basically a tour through our first deployment type. Let me show you quickly global conditions. So all of those rules, if you will, that I just showed you are available here. Here's my robocopy installed custom rule. You see the custom category. All right. So now I've got defined robocopy. So that's my defined application. So maybe now that I've got it defined, I want to go through and deploy it. So I will go deploy this. Just to, again, I'm not really going to deploy it, but just to finish up the end-to-end building of this thing. So I'm going to right-click and I'm going to select deploy. Okay. So that's going to pop up a wizard, and here's my robocopy demo, what collection I want this to go to. Okay. And so I'll, for just grins here, I'll just choose all users. Okay. I could choose systems here if I wanted to as well. I just choose the system collections from the drop-down, or device collections. Okay. Now, notice what I'm not asked. Okay. I'm not asked which deployment type I want to roll. I'm asked what application. The idea here is that through the logic, through the decision structures that we can look at, looking at the rules of your deployment type, we can figure out which deployment type makes sense for a given scenario. Okay. So there is no request at all for which deployment type to deploy. We're just going to look at the application as a whole. So options here, if we want to use default distribution points associated with the collection. Okay. So if, for example, we talked about this before, I have a distribution point group that has collections defined as part of it. When I target my collection, in this case all users, okay, if I have that in one of my collections or in one of my distribution groups, then I will automatically provision, or at least have the option of automatically provisioning that content. Let me try a different one here. So now if I choose a device collection, I'll use all systems. Okay. Notice this shows up. Why? Because I do have a distribution point group that has the all systems collection associated. So now, since it's associated, I have that option. Okay, I'll just leave this here for all systems, no big deal. I'm not actually going to worry about deploying it mandatory anyway or required. So I can choose, hey, use this distribution point group, automatically deploy my content, and off we go. All right, I'll leave that turned on. Automatically distribute content for dependencies. So if my application has dependencies defined, and I notice that the content for those dependencies the system notices that content for those dependencies is not automatically or is not on a distribution point, then I can choose to put it there. Because again, in order for the application to be deployed successfully, I'm going to need those dependencies. Okay? If configured, then I may automatically run those dependencies. I can't run them without them being on a distribution point. Okay, I'll tie that together for you in a sec. So content. Distribution points or distribution point groups that will receive the content. Notice I have automatically chosen my lab DP group. Why? Because back here I chose use default distribution group. Now if I remove this, I don't have anything here. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and put this back, hit next, and off we go. In my choice, I have the ability to choose an individual distribution point or a distribution point group. Certainly you can manage distribution points individually today. Definitely encourage you to try to, or to at least evaluate distribution point groups. Streamlines the management of distribution points really well. The one thing about distribution point groups that you'll need to factor in is this. If you use them, then you're going to kind of hide from your site here which distribution points are actually in the group name. So certainly if you're going to use distribution point groups, like anything, you're going to want to have a naming convention that will kind of lay out for you which distribution points you're talking about. You're going to want to make sure your distribution point groups are managed and have the appropriate distribution points in them, and so on. So when you choose that as the target, you're hitting the expected distribution points rather than accidentally moving it to ones you don't intend. Okay. All right. So we'll click next. Distribution settings or deployment settings. What we want to do, we're either going to choose this deployment to install the application or uninstall. Again, we have the uninstall command line that's specified on the application that, as long as it's filled in, we can go ahead and trigger the uninstall, no problem. So for now, I'll do install, and the purpose, either available or required. Again, what does this map to? Available maps to the old style optional. Required maps to mandatory. Required has a bit of a twist here, though. So if you specify required, then that's telling Configuration Manager that you absolutely require that application to be present on the target systems. Okay. When you specify that, then certainly we're going to go ahead and deploy the application, put it on there as a required app, no problem. User doesn't have to select it, just goes on. Mandatory. But the twist is, when you say it's required, then we're going to go through on a schedule, by default once a week, I'll show that to you in just a sec, and ensure that that application is still there. And if it's not there, so for example, you deploy it today, it goes on today, tomorrow somehow it gets removed, then 6 days from then, 6 days from tomorrow, so a week by default, we're going to reevaluate, realize that application is not there, and we're going to force it back onto that workstation. Okay, that's your twist on required. Again, I'll show you that in client settings where you set that in just a sec. All right, so notice that depending on whether I choose available or required, my options will change. And it's not just a gray out or not gray, it's actually different options. So while I'm with required, deploy automatically according to a schedule, whether or not users logged on, or send wake-up packets. So options that will make sense depending on your configurations that you've made in your application. Send wake-up package is a wake on LAN thing. Send wake-up package, there are other options like through power management to wake systems, and the AMT can wake up systems and that kind of thing. This is specifically wake on LAN. If I choose available, then I have an option, require administrator approval in the catalog. So if I had tied this to a user collection, in fact, let me do that and just show you here. So if I, instead of all systems, specify all users like I had before, then again, this option grays out. I'm going to have to go back and specify a deployment. So let me do that real quick. Roll on. Yeah, so now it's available. Require administrator approval if users request this application. So this is the approval mechanism for the software catalog. All right. So not everything in the software catalog may be just freely available and you want to deploy wherever. You may want users to be able to ask for it, but because it's license sensitive or whatever, you want to have an approval mechanism. That's what this introduces. Okay. All right, specify the schedule for the deployment, what our time zone is, UTC or local, whatever, when the deployment's available or application's available. The user experience, whenever you install the software, either display in Software Center the different pop-ups, notifications, whatever, only show notifications in the for computer restarts, or display in Software Center and show all notifications. Okay. When the installation deadline is reached, allow different activities. So this actually will get around maintenance windows, if you will, and allow computer restarts, allow deployments, or whatever. So by default, the maintenance window is going to be respected. Doesn't matter whether you are reaching your mandatory time or not. If the system that you're targeting is not in a maintenance window, then we're not going to automatically deploy. Now, the exception to that, obviously, is if you're deploying to a user and the user selects to go ahead and deploy, then we're going to allow that to happen because the user's manually chosen to do the deployment. But if you're deploying to systems, and the maintenance window has not come up yet, then even though it's mandatory, we're going to respect that maintenance window unless you set these options to bypass the maintenance window. So these are available on a deployment by deployment basis. So if there is something that's an emergency you want to send out regardless of maintenance windows, you can do that. Okay. Configure alerts and different things that are available. So if you want to track your deployment and make it available to the administrator to know whether we've reached a certain SLA deployment threshold, whether we haven't, that kind of thing, you can configure that here. Then you can set your maintenance mode options for operations managers. So the tie-in here between configuration manager and operations manager, if we're targeting a system that has an operations manager agent on it, and you want to make sure that agent goes into maintenance mode, if you will, during the deployment in case there's a system restart or other things that happen, and you don't want to send alerts during that time, whatever, you can do that. Now, a little bit of explanation here. This is really not true operations manager maintenance mode. True operations manager maintenance mode is a scenario where you define that kind of in the operations manager console or through other mechanisms. In the console then, on the operations manager side, it shows a wrench, if you will, indicating the system's going through maintenance. That's really not what we're talking about here. The experience through configuration manager during operations manager maintenance mode is that the operations manager health service, as it's called, will be put in a paused state. So during the period of a deployment, the operations manager agent is not really doing anything. It's paused. Therefore, any system restarts, anything in the event logs, things like that, will not be recognized as problems by the operations manager agent. When we're done, we'll take the system out of the pause state and resume activity from the point of taking it out forward, meaning we're not going to go back and replay things that happened in the event logs and so on while we were paused. All right, so that's really what you're doing. It's effective, very much. Some of the issues that we had in setting Operations Manager Maintenance Mode in Configuration Manager 2007 are now gone. It works fine in Operations Manager paired with Configuration Manager 2012. So that's what that's for. Okay, we can also generate alerts and so on if the software distribution fails, if you're tracking that with Operations Manager and so on. All right, and from there we have a summary, and we can complete our deployment. Now, you notice your distribute content option up here. Because I specified that in my distribution settings, I don't really need to go distribute content anymore. But if I wanted to add or manage my distribution points later, I could do that. All right. Very good. So we've gone end to end. We have our first deployment or our first application fully created, deployment types and deployments. So now that that's done, let me go show you what I was mentioning over under administration about the deployment reevaluation. So if I go under client settings and look at my default client settings, go to properties real quick, then go to software or application deployment, software deployment. Notice schedule for reevaluation for deployments is going to occur every 7 days by default. If you want to change this, you can globally. If you want to, again, create a custom client settings and change it for certain systems, you can do that too. But that's where we actually define that and specify our reevaluation settings. All right, so let's go back to our software library and let's actually pull together a couple of different applications and link those together. Okay. So we've got Robocopy and deployed it end to end. So let me just go through and quickly create a couple of different applications. I won't take these all the way through. I won't actually create deployments for them because you've seen that. You have the idea. I just want to show and demonstrate how you link these things together. So carrying on with our scenario, we've decided we want to deploy Robocopy. But what we realize is that Robocopy has a dependency. Again, this is a fake, kind of demo, so just go with me on it. So for the example, we've determined that Robocopy needs .NET Framework 2.0. So we're going to go ahead and build an application for .NET Framework 2.0. So let me go create an application. Again, .NET Framework 2.0. I must not have ever closed that. .NET Framework 2.0 is an executable in my example. So I'm going to manually specify my information. Okay, I'm not going to specify anything else. Again, don't really need to. Want to move forward. Not going to put anything in here. Don't really care at the moment. I'm going to add one deployment type to specify it. Again, I'm going to be using a script installer option because it's an executable, so I'm going to have to manually specify it. DT for deployment type. So I'm going to specify my content location. And hopefully let it catch up here for a minute. If I didn't type that right, let me make sure. I think that's right. Let me verify it. It's not showing me, but let me just check my package source. Yeah, .NET 2.0. Okay. So good enough. Now I'm going to browse for my executable. There it is. Again, this is fake. It's not even a real .NET 2.0. This is an empty file that I renamed .NET 2.0. You can see it's zero link, so definitely not .NET. This is just for sample purposes. So I'm going to hit OK. Again, doesn't detect anything. Good enough. I'm not even going to specify uninstall because I'm just quickly running through this. I'm going to have to specify detection methods, so I'll just do that really quick. Again, fake it out, so I can move on. User experience, again, I don't really care about setting anything here, and move on through, and off we go. Okay, so I'm going to close the wizard and move on through, and we're done. So generating that, so now I should have in just a second .NET 2.0 as my second application. And good enough, I do. So I don't think I closed that. Let me minimize this so I can go find that. Close. Okay, good enough. Okay. All right, good enough. So now I have .NET 2.0 demo. So the idea of our demo here is that Robocopy depends on .NET 2.0. So what I can do is specify by going to properties that dependency. Okay. So now notice whenever properties of this come up in just a second, I don't really have any ability to specify dependencies on my application itself. The dependency mapping is done on my deployment type. So if I edit my deployment type, I can go to dependencies. And here I specify that what my dependency is. So I'll call this test dependency group. I'm going to add in that I depend on .NET Framework 2.0. Here it is. Okay. Now, notice one of the options I have here selected by default. If I see that .NET 2.0 is not installed, I can automatically install it. Now, you don't have to choose that, right? But you can if you want to. Notice also that having all your information configured correctly for install and uninstall. Obviously, install command line needs to be configured correctly and is a requirement. Uninstall command line optional. You don't have to choose. Actually, let me correct that. You don't have to configure both install and uninstall command line at all. You can have a deployment type that is for uninstall only. You can have a deployment type that is for install only. Whatever you want to do. Typically, configuring both at the same time in the same deployment type, makes a lot of sense. Whatever. So, regardless, if you're going to auto install it, you have to have this deployment type with the install command line option configured. Okay. So I'm going to hit OK, and now I've linked these two applications together and said automatically install .NET 2.0 if it's not there. Okay, so that's on my properties of my Robocopy deployment type. So I'm all done with that. Now let me see the effects over on .NET 2.0. So as soon as this clears, I'll go to Properties on .NET 2.0, and we'll look at our References tab. Okay, so it's all saved. So let's go into Robocopy Properties and see what the effect was. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to go into Robocopy Properties. I meant to go into .NET 2.0 Properties. Let me go do that. So if I go then to the References tab on .NET 2.0, I will see in my dependencies that I now have a link with Robocopy. Okay, so that's done. All right, so that's about as much as I want to do with that. So now let's take our next example and create yet another application. So following our example, now we've decided that we've deployed Robocopy, everyone's happy, but this new thing we found called Rich Copy has come out, and we think that should replace Robocopy. So we're going to go ahead and create an application to do that. So in this case, Rich Copy obviously is very cool and useful and more advanced. But one thing we notice about it is it has an MSI. So I'm going to choose the Windows Installer deployment type, and notice the difference in the wizard. All right, and we'll go to Rich Copy now. Okay, good enough, and we'll actually go through all the way to the file. So here's our richcopy.msi here. Good enough. So now that's all we need. We'll go through the wizard. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on through, and that's it. We're importing the information from the MSI that quick. Everything is filled out. Okay. Couple little options to specify a little bit on the deployment type that I don't care about for now, and off we go. Okay, so we're creating that. Obviously, much quicker whenever you have the ability to import from the MSI, and as soon as that finishes up, I'll show you quickly some of the differences in how we our default options, if you will, because we chose the MSI. All right, so just waiting for that to finish up. Okay, so that finished up, so I'm going to hit close, and then we'll go, and again, following with our example, this is Rich Copy, and we're going to let it replace Robocopy. So let's go into Properties here and just take a look. Again, I'm not going to create any deployments for this kind of thing. I just want to link a little bit and show you. So again, nothing really filled in here besides the default, nothing really filled in here, no references yet, no distribution settings or things like that. But if we go to deployment type, notice, click on edit, that now for content, again, nothing different here, but for programs, we automatically have the install program set up. You can certainly change it if you want to, but we have the uninstall string set up as well by product code. Our detection method is automatically configured for us. Okay, so pretty cool things that we can do that are automatically supplied in the wizard for us. Okay, so certainly more streamlined to use the wizard to do an MSI, do something that's predefined. You certainly can go in and customize whatever was configured the way you like after the fact. So just a difference. So what I'm going to do here is create a supercedence relationship. So basically I'm going to say this application is an upgrade or replacement for an existing application in the software library. So I'm going to call this a supercedence, or in other words, configure a relationship where Rich Copy supersedes Robocopy. To do that, to build that relationship, I'm just going to quickly add what deployment type and then what superseded application. I'm going to browse to the application. So here's Rich Copy. Hit OK. All right, so no problem. I've found Rich Copy. Now I'm going to figure out what I want to do. Robocopy is a script. Do I want to actually replace or not replace with a new deployment type? So in my case, I'm going to say, oh no, I want to go ahead and replace with Rich Copy. And do I want to install or do I want to uninstall? So I'm going to say go ahead and uninstall. Okay, you don't have to choose either one, but this really helps you. So whenever you deploy Rich Copy, then if we see Robocopy there, then we can uninstall it. Okay. All right. So again, we can go off in the weeds on this. You'll see some of this on the next session where we talk about the client perspective of this, and we'll have some demos of it. But let's take this also to the next level. So we talked about our rules engine. So the deployment type that I'm going to create for rich copy, if I see that robocopy is not there, so maybe let's follow through the scenario. Maybe all of the systems in my environment where I want robocopy to be deployed, it already is. Okay, so or maybe even a better scenario would be, some machines have robocopy, some machines don't. So for those machines that I have robocopy, I want to define a specific deployment type to handle that. For other machines that don't have robocopy already, then I want to define a deployment type to handle that scenario. Okay? So the way I can kind of break that apart is in our rules engine. So if I go to my deployment type, again, I just have one. I'll just show you this as an example. Then I can go to my requirements. Again, I'm in rich copy, so for this deployment type, I can add a requirement. So I previously built, for example, this custom requirement that says robocopy exists. Okay, so robocopy installed, and I can either say true or false. Okay, I can just say file version, whatever, company, all these different attributes, right? So I can just say size equals whatever. I can do an exist or not too, but that's the way I chose. I'm going to say 1000 as an example, right? So if robocopy is there and if it's of the right size of 1000, then this rule is met. And so I continue and I can evaluate my next rule, which might be that robocopy, to again take the scenario to the next level, is deployed throughout the environment, but only on Windows 7 systems that have robocopy do I want to replace it with rich copy. So I can say device, and I can say operating system, and then I can say Windows 7, okay, and hit OK. So that way, this deployment type, whenever it goes out and sees a system that's Windows 7 and has robocopy installed with a size of 1000, then this deployment type is going to go ahead and execute and install rich copy. Okay, so you get the idea, right? So let's just hit OK, and now we have all of that configured. Okay, good enough. And that kind of takes us end to end through what I wanted to talk about in terms of building applications, in terms of showing how you link things together. But I'm not quite done yet. So another thing that we haven't paid a whole lot of attention to that merits a little bit of discussion are all of the options that you see on the ribbon up top. Okay, some of these options are really pretty cool. Won't take us long to hit them. I just want to hit them real quick. So as soon as we finish saving this, we'll go through it. So certainly, just starting left to right and going across. Let's say that we have. And let me just make a little change here. Hang on a minute. I'm going to go into robocopy for a minute, and I'm just going to change my description of robocopy to be something silly. Okay, administrator comments. Test. Okay, I'm just going to put another test. What that's going to do is it's going to cause us to be at revision 3. Okay, so I'm going to save that. So one of the things that sometimes comes up in environments is some change was made. And it's really kind of a mystery. Certainly we could track some of that with status messages before, but it's kind of a mystery as to, first, who made the change, and then more specifically, what change was made. Okay? So now in Configuration Manager 2012, we've added this thing called revision history that allows us to answer that question. So as soon as it's finished saving, we'll go look at it and we'll be able to see all of the revision history for robocopy. So if we click on that, click on revision history, then we can see 3 versions of robocopy. And if we look at it and go, wait, hang on, I didn't know there was a version 3 that was made. What's the difference? I think I really want version 2. We can go view version 2, and that's going to pop up and show us everything we know about it. And you're like, oh, wait, here's the one that doesn't have the administrator comments. Yeah, this is actually the one that I want. So instead of using revision 1, I'm going to go ahead and restore revision 2. I'm not going to actually do that. I want to make sure I keep my current one. Funny story. I actually did. You have to be careful with this. because the revisions contain all of the changes, right? So I was working in a demo, and I had set up a whole bunch of dependencies and relationships and things like that previously, and then had demonstrated my revision history and overrode by restoring, and then came back later and wondered, why are all of my dependencies gone? Well, it's obvious why they were gone, because I replaced the version, right? So be careful with that. I'm not going to actually do it, but you can restore that if you want to and put in place what might have been the intention before whatever change was made that was either a mistake or not wanted or whatever else. Okay. Create pre-staged content files. So we talked about this briefly. What this is if you have a distribution point out somewhere that's across a sensitive WAN link, even though we have throttling, you just don't either trust it or want to saturate the link that way or whatever. Then you can create pre-staged content files, put together a whole bunch of different applications. Let's just do it real quick, show you the wizard, into a file, right? So let's just browse. I'm not going to actually create it, but hit save, next. Okay, validating specified content. Okay, so click next. What content locations I want, and so on. So it's going to take my robocopy demo, wrap it into a pre-staged content file. I can choose, notice, export all dependencies, which is why it's pulled up .NET 2.0 as well. So I can export all of that into a content file and then make that available onto a distribution point locally, which is cool. Retire. So if I am finished, I think, deploying a given application, I want to retire it, but I don't yet want to delete it. I can just click retire. Then if at some point in the future it's time to reinstate, I can reinstate it. Okay. If I am ready to delete from the console, but I just have this feeling that maybe at some point in the future I may need this again, I can export this, or maybe it's a standard practice that you export before deletion or whatever else. You can do that, have it available, save it off, be able to import it again later on. This is really cool, especially as you're becoming accustomed to using the rules engine and that kind of thing. You can simulate a deployment. And so if I want to simulate what a robocopy deployment would be like, make sure all of the dependencies come down, are in place, what my expected result would be, I can use this wizard. It will go out and simulate the deployment of the application, but not actually make any changes. It just goes through all of the different dependencies, rules, supercedences, references, all the different things that are a part of the application, and checks things for me and bubbles back the result I could expect by doing it. Okay, so pretty cool. Again, set security. So other things in here, pretty self-explanatory. Set security scope, worth mentioning. So a number of different objects, certainly applications, certainly packages, things like that you can set as part of given security scope. So if you're building this application, it should only be seen by maybe your server admins or whatever. Then you can put it in the appropriate bucket. And then when folks that log in and use the console that are part of that given security scope log in, they can see it, but other people can't, which is really cool. Again, one of the security enhancements of 2012 that takes away a lot of the reasoning. Folks used to use different primary sites, separate primary sites in the past. Don't need to do that anymore. You can very easily segregate the view of the environment in the console just with one primary site by setting appropriate security scopes. Here's where you set up your categories and manage those. Okay. And then talking about all these relationships like we've done, visualizing all the dependencies and so on that are in place and so on can get confused. Certainly in our case, it's easy because we just have one supercedence, one dependency. So if I want to look at robocopy and look at my dependencies, easy enough. In a diagram view, I pop it up, and we see that robocopy depends on robocopy test DT, which depends on .NET demo. Okay? So it kind of lines everything out. So if you have other dependencies that are in place, just the chart gets a little bit more information in it and so on. Same kind of thing, if I want to look at my supercedence, then I can view my supercedence relationships and see the same kind of diagram. All right, so it pops up here in just a sec. And there it is, right? So rich copy supersedes rich copy, this deployment type supersedes robocopy demo. So you get the idea. Nice ways that we can view the environment and see what's actually out there. All right. So with that said, I'm done for this discussion. We will continue on with this on the client side in part 4. Take a lot of the things that we've done here, maybe not the same demos, but certainly some demos of applications, of packages. See what the experience is on the client whenever it shows up there, and users start to work with things. So we will see you in part 4.